breaking news for your home. Wayday! Wayfair's big sale is almost here, and you can score the best deals in home. Like up to 80% off everything home. Yes, you heard that right. 80% off with free shipping on everything. Plus surprise flash deals all Wayday long. We're talking outdoor furniture and essentials, rugs, and more. All at Wayfair, and all up to 80% off during Wayday. Shop Wayfair's Wayday from April 25th through 27th.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
This is episode 418 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hello, I'm Jeff Crosby.
And I'm Professor Shelley Ann Jackson.
We are the author and illustrators of Little Lions, Bull Baiters, and Hunting Hounds, A History of Dog Breeds.
Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this.
It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 1, Hotspur delivers a chilling threat against King Richard, saying, "I'll have a starling shall be taught to speak nothing but Mortimer, and give it him to keep his anger still in motion." It's a line rooted in the politics of kingship and rebellion, but it also touches on something really practical from the life of William Shakespeare, and that's the idea of teaching a starling to speak. This wasn't just poetic fancy, it was actually something that was not only possible, but happening during the life of William Shakespeare. This week, we're stepping beyond the metaphor to explore the real bird behind this threat. What was the behavior, temperament, and reputation of the starling for early modern England? Could they really be trained to mimic human speech? And where did they sit on the line between pets and dinner for early modern England? Here to guide us into the world of the early modern starling is Lee Ray, author of Creatures of Story and Song, Tracing Britain's Lost Species. Lee's work traces the historical presence of wild animals and plants, and today they help us uncover how fact and drama intersect in the history of one of the world's most fascinating birds. Lee Ray is an associate lecturer at the Open University and a research officer at Bangor University. In combining historical sources with modern scientific knowledge, Lee's research aims to reconstruct the changing state of nature in Britain and Ireland before the Industrial Revolution. They are the author of the Atlas of Early Modern Wildlife, a fellow of the Linnean Society, and one of the co-conveners of the Animal History Group. You can find out more about Lee in the show notes for today's episode. Hello, Lee. Welcome back to That Shakespeare Life. So glad to have you with us again.
Hey, it's so good to be back.
For listeners who may not have a clear image of a starling in mind, explain for us what a starling would have looked like, especially for Shakespeare's lifetime. How large were they compared to other birds we might be more familiar with, like a sparrow, a blackbird, or even a pigeon? And I wonder if there are any distinctive physical characteristics like their plumage, their coloring, or beak shape that would have made starlings especially recognizable for an early modern observer.
Yeah, so the starling is, just like you said, about the same size as a blackbird. So it's halfway between a pigeon and a sparrow. And the funny thing about starling is it looks exactly like a blackbird. But when you get closer to it, you can see that there's this iridescent sheen to the back of the feathers. It's all these blues and greens. And in the winter especially, there are tiny pale stars all over the feathers. So you can especially see that in winter, but also at other times of year. And the other thing about starlings, which is really interesting, is especially in the winter, they form murmurations in the evening. So just when they're going to bed, when they're going to roost in the evening, if you look up around a roost site, you can see them making all sorts of strange shapes in the sky. They flock together in these dense, tight flocks and fly over and over each other and create all these shapes. There's actually a description of this from the 16th century. It's from Turner on the Avium Principium on birds. He says, "It's peculiar to starlings in their kind to fly in crowds and wheel about as if it were in a ball, all tending towards the middle of a band." And that's exactly what it looks like.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. It's like painting in the sky.
Mm.
How common were starlings in England during Shakespeare's lifetime? Were they abundant in urban places like London, or were they more associated with rural fields and farmland? I'm wondering whether or not Shakespeare himself could have encountered them on any kind of regular basis.
It's a complicated question, but right up my street. So let me give you the long answer, which is that maybe we could go backwards in time. So today, starlings in Britain and Ireland are really widespread, but they're also declining. The numbers are going down quite fast. Starlings are also found across Europe, into Eastern Europe, and even into the west of Asia. And quite often, they migrate from the east of Europe and west of Asia, so that in the winter time, they end up in Western Europe, so around Britain and Ireland. So we've got lots of them here at that time of year. But if we go back 200 years, they were much less widespread. So in that time period, they weren't found at all in the southwest of England or in the west of Wales or Ireland, and maybe not at all in Scotland. And the reason for this is a bit complicated. Some people think that they were always that widespread until the modern period when they've suddenly become way more abundant. But I think that's not quite true. When I looked at starlings in the past, I found records from around Shakespeare's time, from the west of Britain and from Scotland and from Ireland. So I think that starlings have did decline a bit, probably during Shakespeare's lifetime, and have kind of made a recovery since then. What's for certain is that starlings were definitely found in the south and east of England, especially in Shakespeare's time, just like they are today. And they were probably targeted around London by the pet trade. And of course, they were common pets. So even if people didn't know about them in the wild, they would have seen them as pets. There's one other thing which maybe is worth noticing here. Recently, over the last 200 years, starlings have been introduced to lots of other countries as well. So there are starlings in Australia and South Africa and Argentina and the USA and Canada. And there's a very old myth, which is that starlings were introduced to the USA, to Central Park actually, by an avid Shakespeare fan who wanted every species of bird mentioned by Shakespeare to be introduced to the United States. But we think that's actually not true. And they were probably introduced for pest control. So Shakespeare fans are off the hook.
Well, we do appreciate their pest control services, and we can bring their Shakespeare connections on their behalf, even if that's not what they were originally introduced for. Starlings are known, as you mentioned, for these loud murmurations, but do we have early modern commentary that talks about this behavior? I mean, were they ever considered destructive in some way, or maybe even used as pest control during Shakespeare's lifetime?
Yeah, absolutely. As for the loud murmurations, there's a broadside ballad. So this is a song which was written on a very cheap piece of paper, which could be transported easily and given to someone literate in the pub so that they could sing it out and everyone could learn it. And it's a piece of news. We have it, and it's called A Battle of Birds. And it is a battle, theoretically, between two flocks of starlings over the city of Cork in Ireland. This song was sung all over England to sort of commemorate this battle. I'll read you one of the verses. It said, "Yet long with loud and chattering cries, each company gainst the other flies, with bloody beaks, remorseless still, their feathered foes to maim or kill. Where whilst this battle did remain, their bodies fell like drops of rain." I think that's a really beautiful little song. But we do know that they were also considered worthy of pest control. So during the Tudor period, people were really worried about food security, especially in agricultural areas. So there were a series of acts passed in England and Wales, which were the Grain Acts, usually called. The Second Grain Act in 1566, which was renewed in 1572 and 1598, so very Shakespearean era piece of legislation, put a bounty on the heads of birds. So starlings, anyone who could kill 12 starlings was supposed to be given a penny, and every parish was made responsible for persecuting these pest species and for paying bounties on them. The bounty on starlings actually wasn't that high, so if you managed to kill crows or rooks or jackdaws or magpies, these larger corvids, people would be getting a penny for just 3 of those, which is much more lucrative. But of course, they are much bigger birds, so maybe they would have been more of a threat. What's really interesting, though, is the person who studied this the most is Roger Lovegrove, who wrote Silent Fields. And Roger Lovegrove looked at the starling records and found actually, there's not many records of these bounties being paid for starlings. It seems that either they weren't being targeted that much, or maybe the starlings that were caught were being sold for maybe the pet trade.
Just a quick reminder as you're listening to the show, if you would like to see visual images of the starling from the life of William Shakespeare, including images and links to some of the primary documents and paintings that we're talking about in today's conversation, you can look at all that history inside That Shakespeare Society. Every episode of our show, including this one, has a companion detailed show notes that goes into the visual history and more in-depth background content of our show. And you can explore all of that while you're listening by going to CassidyCash.com/episode 418 and clicking on That Shakespeare Society. And now let's dive into the history. Now, you've mentioned a couple of different ways that the starling was known here, but the pet trade surprises me. What was the general reputation of starlings? I mean, some people thought that they were pests and wanted them caught and disposed of. But if they were also kept as pets, then other people would have admired them or considered them something to be enjoyed. So did they have a settled upon place in terms of their reputation, or was it just controversial, I guess you could say, the opinion of starlings?
It's a bit confusing because on paper, they're this pest species which every parish was supposed to destroy. But in reality, it seems to have been much more complicated because no one was claiming those bounties for pest control. In 1601, there was a translation of Pliny the Elder's Natural History. So Pliny the Elder, of course, is this Roman historian writing in the 1st century CE. But in 1601, Philemon Holland translated his natural history into English. And Philemon Holland actually enhanced it a little bit. He added some details. So in the original, there's a description of nightingales and starlings owned by lesser members of the Caesar family, by Germanicus or Drusus Caesar. In the translation by Philemon Holland, we have, moreover, they would study upon their lessons and meditate all day long, and from day to day come out with new words still. Yea, and they were able to continue a long speech and discourse. So what we have here, according to Philemon Holland anyway, and not according to the original Pliny, is that starlings were actually so intelligent that they were going beyond sort of what we might consider today as the normal bounds of animal intelligence. They weren't just learning to say words, which apparently they were able to do, and to make sounds, interesting sounds. They were also able to understand them. There's one other kind of strange reputation from this time period. So in Camden's Britannica, which went through lots of editions in the time period, it says that the medieval encyclopedist Alexander Neckham described them as Ganymede's birds. I've never seen this, and I have read through Alexander Neckham's encyclopedia, De Proprietibus Rerum, but I can't find this, and I think it might have been made up in the early modern period. But of course, Ganymede was this character from mythology who had the reputation of being a beautiful young man, a little bit naive, but also had these queer connotations of sort of homosexual love. And I wonder why starlings got that reputation.
That is a fascinating question. I'm hung up still on the idea that they were learning. When you said that the quote mentioned they came out with new words each day, I was just assuming that was something like a parrot, where they've heard it enough and now they're saying something back that sounds loosely similar. But that reference makes it sound like there was two-way communication happening with the starling, where they could be given verbal commands maybe and understand what they needed to do.
Yeah, it sounds something like that they were almost becoming little scholars in their own right? Very strange.
Well, if people are keeping them as pets, where are they coming from? I mean, are people just, if you wanted a pet starling, you're catching one out of the wild and then training it with these words? Or was there some kind of commercial aspect to this where someone would have been raising starlings to give as pets to people or to sell them as pets to people?
Interesting question. I don't think anyone was breeding them, or at least I don't have any evidence of that. But what we do have evidence for is lots of songbirds were being caught with nets and traps during this period. And starlings in particular seem to have been caught, especially when they were migrating. So we have in autumn and in spring, lots of starlings migrating through not only the local population, which was resident in Britain all year round, but these sort of Eastern European and West Asian starlings, lots of them were coming west for the winter. And when they were coming through, they seem to have been getting caught. So, for example, in Gravesend in London, lots of them seem to have been caught in autumn and spring and then sold at market. And it's really fascinating, actually, that people catching them weren't always professional fowlers. In some cases, it seems to have been just people sort of in their off time. So there's lots of weavers, apparently, in Gravesend who were catching small birds in that time period. We've got a pretty good source from the time period, which is Samuel Pepys's diary, I suppose, a little bit after Shakespeare's time. Sunday, the 1st of March, 1668, he says, "I was mightily taken with a starling, which Mrs. Martin hath. That was the king's, which he kept in his bedchamber, and do whistle and talk the most and best of ever I heard anything in my life." I suppose there's a few really interesting things there. This bird does seem to have been taught to make interesting sounds and to say a few words like a parrot. Also, it's interesting that this bird had a career of its own. It went from being the king's starling, so maybe this is a entertainment suitable for a king, and then it was passed along to this Mrs. Martin, and then 2 months later, actually, in May, it was given by Mrs. Martin to Pepys himself. So maybe it was a gift to curry favour. Interesting how these birds were travelling.
It reminds me of some of the dancing horses and even, I think, monkeys that were put on display. I think that harkens back to the animal entertainment culture that existed in Tudor England. I wouldn't have thought of the starling having been part of that. So it's fascinating to think. Did any of these records actually say which words it was that they said, or just that it could speak words?
Well, I can't think of any which described particular words. Yeah, good question, though.
Were starlings ever considered food items? Did anybody ever eat them, or were they always just either pest control or your pet?
So this is another really peculiar thing about the starling. In Francis Willoughby's Ornithology of 1678, he said, "Stares, so starlings, are not eaten in England by reason of the bitterness of their flesh. The Italians and other outlandish people are not so squeamish, but they can away with them and make a dish of them for all that." So it seems to be something which was exotified, something which was seen as not quite English to do, which is really strange because the English were eating lots of songbirds like larks and things, but apparently not starlings. There was a health writer.
They drew the line at starlings. Larks are good, sparrows are good, not starlings.
Yeah, why? It's so strange. There was a health writer called Andrew Board who suggested that starlings engender cholera, which I think might mean cholera. So maybe there was sort of a health crisis about it.
That would make sense. Definitely would expect there to be some kind of superstitious fear in that way would have been driving that to draw the line there. I know that we would love to explore the history of starlings from this time period even further. And from your work into this topic, I know you will have some great suggestions for us. Where should we begin if we're new to the history of starlings from Shakespeare's lifetime and we want to learn more?
Yeah, I think that there's 3 really good resources. So the broadside ballad I talked about earlier, A Battle of Birds, is available online with the early broadside ballad archive. It's number 20269 in their archive, and it's actually been performed by a modern performer. So you can hear it performed as maybe it would have been in the early modern period, which is this really amazing audio experience. There's a great article for people interested in the myth that starlings might have been introduced to the United States in order to introduce all of the birds of Shakespeare. And that's an article by Lauren Fugate and John McNeill Miller in Environmental Humanities Journal. The article is called Shakespeare's Starlings, Literary History and Fictions of Invasiveness. But if you just want an overall sort of idea of what songbirds were being eaten and where and how birds were being caught, there's a book called Michael Shrub, Feasting, Fowling and Feathers, which is fantastic for this, and it talks a lot about starlings.
These are fascinating resources. We will make sure to place links to these as well as to Lee's work in the show notes for today's episode. So stay tuned for the URL for where to find those. Lee, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those, and you are free to choose a different selection this time than last time, or to bring back old favorites, whichever you prefer.
Excellent. I was not happy with my suggestion last time. I've got a new suggestion, which I think is much better. And it's a little bit cheeky. I think what I would want is the chunkiest possible guidebook to the local wild plants and animals of the island. Now, of course, this would rely on me knowing that I was going to the island beforehand, which maybe might not happen if I was going to a desert island. But imagine I could be identifying the flowers in spring, watching the birds and commenting on the behavior of all the little mammals, and maybe reading Shakespeare to the wildlife. I think I'd really like that.
Well, I think that would be a beautiful and very poetic way to spend your time on the deserted island. That's an excellent choice. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
So this year I've started an Instagram account talking lots about animals in the past, but I've actually just wrapped up a book. It's called Creatures of Story and Song, and it's out this year with reaction books, and it looks at the creatures which went locally extinct in parts of Britain. So things like the wolves and eagles and large whales. And what I wanted to do was explore the literature written about them when they were still common in the medieval and early modern periods. So there's lots of Shakespeare in there. It's written for a general audience, so hopefully people will really enjoy it.
That's fantastic. It's exciting to hear about your new publication, and we will make sure to place a link to that in our show notes. I'm also thrilled to hear about your Instagram account. We hang out there a good bit as well. What is your Instagram URL? Where can we find you there?
I am Leafy History on Instagram and also Blue Sky.
Fantastic. We'll place links to Lee's social links so you can connect there. Thank you so much, Lee Ray, for being here again this week to take us through the history of the starling for Shakespeare's lifetime and help us to understand that reference about Mortimer from Shakespeare's play. This has just been a fun conversation. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks so much for inviting me.
All of the direct clickable links to the resources Lee recommends for you today, along with their work and new publication that's available out now. You can find all of this at CassidyCash.com/episode 418. That's CassidyCash.com/EP418. While you're there, if you'd like to see all the insider extras of the pictures and documents we talk about today, you can find that by clicking on That Shakespeare Society. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.